I'm Samuel Ellis. I'm 28 years old, and my own mother told me that the greatest gift I could give my brother for his wedding was to vanish from the family forever. Before I tell you how a multimillion-dollar CEO showed up in the middle of that catastrophic wedding and changed my life with a single sentence, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's good to know you're out there. The sound of chaos is a strange thing. From the quiet of my car in the far corner of the parking lot, it was a muffled symphony of disaster. I could imagine the discordant notes, the confused chatter of 100 guests, the shrill, panicked questions, and above it all, the booming, furious voice of my brother, Brian. It was the sound of a perfectly orchestrated world coming completely, beautifully undone. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the eerie Grand Manor, the venue I had so carefully selected months ago. It was warm on my skin, a stark contrast to the core of ice that had formed in my chest. Inside that magnificent building, a wedding was supposed to be happening. His wedding, the wedding I had planned, the wedding I had paid for, the wedding I had just single-handedly obliterated. I leaned my head back against the worn fabric of the driver's seat and closed my eyes, picturing the scene. The grand ballroom, which should have been filled with the scent of roses and roast chicken, would be stark and empty. The tables, which I had mapped out with military precision, would be bare. No white linens, no gleaming silverware, no custom floral centerpieces. The string quartet I had booked would be at home, their instruments silent. The caterers would be packing up their unused ingredients. My phone, lying on the passenger seat, was having a seizure. It buzzed and vibrated relentlessly, the screen lighting up in a frantic, predictable cycle. Dad, Brian, Aunt Carol, Brian. It was a desperate, digital scream for the person they had banished just last night. The fixer, the problem solver, the family janitor. But that person was no longer available. I could see them so clearly. My mother, Eleanor, her face a mask of horrified disbelief, her social standing crumbling with every passing second. My father, Richard, pale and useless, wringing his hands as he always did in a crisis. And Brian, my golden boy brother, his handsome face, usually so smug and self-assured, would be contorted into a mask of pure, impotent rage. And Lauren, the bride, a part of me, a small, lingering part, felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was collateral damage in a war she hadn't even known was being fought. They wanted me to vanish. A simple request, delivered with the casual cruelty of a death sentence. So I did. I vanished, and I took their perfect day with me, pulling it down into the abyss right alongside me. My hand turned the key in the ignition. The old engine coughed, then settled into a familiar, comforting rumble. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing left for me back there. As I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the open road, the frantic buzzing of my phone faded into the background. For the first time in 28 years, I wasn't driving toward a problem I had to solve. I was driving away from one. I was driving toward an unknown future, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of my past. It wasn't supposed to end like this, but then again, they were the ones who lit the match. It started so much earlier than just one night, a long, slow burn of slights and sacrifices that all led to this final, glorious explosion. To understand how a man could dismantle his own brother's wedding, you have to understand what it was like to grow up as me in the Ellis house. There were two sons, Brian, the golden child, and Samuel, the other one. Brian was born with a spotlight attached to him. He was the charming one, the witty one, the one who looked good in the family Christmas photo. I was the one who made sure the camera had batteries. From as early as I can remember, our roles were defined. When Brian's brand new bicycle got a flat tire, I was the 10-year-old who spent a Saturday afternoon with my dad's rusty tools, patching the tube until my knuckles were raw. Brian was too busy telling the neighborhood kids about the great injustice that had befallen him. When he got the bike back, he rode off without a word of thanks. My father clapped me on the back and said, "Good job, son. You're a practical one." It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like a label. Brian was the star. I was the stagehand. This dynamic only intensified as we got older. While Brian was out setting records on the football field or being elected class president, I was the one who discovered a passion for how things worked, not just bicycle tires but systems. Specifically, the teetering, often chaotic system of our family's business, Ellis Groceries. It was a decent little store, a fixture in our Erie, Pennsylvania community. My father ran it with his heart, but not always with his head. By the time I was 16, I was unofficially balancing the books, creating the weekly staff schedules, and figuring out why the produce was spoiling a day faster than it should. I remember one brutal winter when I was in college, home for Christmas break. A blizzard hit, burying the town in 3 feet of snow. The power went out. Our store's ancient generator, the one my dad had been meaning to replace for years, failed to kick on. We had tens of thousands of dollars worth of frozen and refrigerated goods that were about to become a catastrophic loss. My father was in a state of pure panic. My mother was lighting candles and praying. Brian, home from his fancy university, was complaining that the Wi-Fi was down and he couldn't talk to his girlfriend. I bundled up, waded through the snow to the store, and spent the next 36 hours living on coffee and adrenaline. I manually hauled bags of ice from the one supplier in town who still had power. I rearranged the entire dairy section, packing the most perishable items in insulated containers. I called a friend whose dad was an electrician, and together, in the freezing dark, we managed to bypass the generator's faulty starter and get it roaring to life. I saved the inventory, every last bit of it. When the power was restored and the roads were cleared, my family came to the store. Brian walked in, looked around and said, "Wow, didn't lose anything. Lucky break, huh?" Later that night, at the dinner table, my father raised a glass. "To Brian," he announced. "Just got his semester grades. Straight A's. He's gonna make one hell of a lawyer someday. He's the one who's going to make the Ellis name mean something." They all cheered. I sat there, my hands still aching from hauling ice, my body running on empty, and I was completely, utterly invisible. It wasn't malice, not exactly. It was worse. It was a complete, unthinking blindness to my existence beyond my function. My friend Noah, who saw the whole thing, put it best. "They're not just taking you for granted, Sam," he told me later. His voice filled with a frustration I couldn't yet allow myself to feel. "They've built their entire family reality around the idea that Brian is the asset and you are the utility. And you just keep paying the bill." I just shrugged it off as always. They were my family. What else was I supposed to do? By the time I was 25, I had managed to build a small, respectable life for myself, separate from the gravitational pull of my family. I had taken my knack for systems and turned it into a freelance marketing career. I was good at it. I found a niche helping struggling small businesses in the tri-state area find their footing. I could walk into a failing bakery or a forgotten hardware store and see the potential, the story they weren't telling. I'd build them a new website, run a targeted social media campaign, and get people walking through their doors again. It was fulfilling work. It was mine. Then came the opportunity that was supposed to be my big break. Vance Corporation, a national grocery chain, was launching a massive regional initiative. They wanted to partner with local farms and producers, and they needed a marketing strategist who understood that world, someone who could bridge the gap between corporate and community. It was a dream job. The contract was for $40,000, which to me at the time might as well have been $1 million. It was more than a paycheck. It was validation. It was proof that I was more than just the family fixer. I poured my heart into the proposal. I spent weeks researching, crafting a campaign that was authentic and powerful. Paid off. I beat out dozens of other applicants and went through 3 rounds of interviews. The final step was a meeting with the CEO himself, Arthur Vance. He was an intimidating, sharp-as-a-tack man who saw right through any corporate fluff. We connected. He saw my passion. At the end of the meeting, he shook my hand and said, "We'll be in touch soon, Mr. Ellis. Very soon." I walked out of that skyscraper feeling 10 feet tall. I was on the brink of everything I had ever wanted. The email arrived 2 days later. It was from Arthur Vance's assistant. He wanted to schedule a final call to go over the contract details and make a formal offer. My hands were shaking as I typed my reply. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered, expecting to share my good news. I never got the chance. Her voice was a thin, reedy thread of panic. "Samuel, you have to come home." My stomach dropped. It was the voice she used when the plumbing burst or the taxes were overdue. It was her "we need the fixer" voice. "What is it, Mom? Is Dad okay?" "He's fine, but the store. It's a mess. The suppliers are threatening to cut us off. We took out a second mortgage to cover payroll last month. We're going to lose it, Samuel. Your father's legacy, everything. It's all going to be gone." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had known they were struggling, but I had no idea it was this bad. "What about Brian?" I asked, a familiar, futile question. "He's a lawyer. Can't he look at the contracts? Negotiate with the suppliers?" "Oh, you know Brian," she said, her voice dismissive. "He's building his career. He can't get bogged down in this. This is more your area of expertise. You always knew how to make things work." There it was again. My function. My purpose. I looked at the email from Vance Corporation on my computer screen, the promise of my future shimmering right in front of me. Then I looked at the phone in my hand, the call from a past that refused to let me go. Noah's voice echoed in my head. "Don't do it, man. This is your chance. Let them fail." But I couldn't. My father's face swam in my mind's eye. The proud man he was, reduced to losing everything he'd ever worked for. My mind was a battlefield. My dream versus their reality. My future versus their past. It was no contest, really. I had been trained for this my whole life. With a heart that felt like a block of lead, I sat down and composed the hardest email of my life. I wrote to Arthur Vance's assistant, withdrawing my name from consideration due to a sudden, severe family emergency. I gave no details. I just clicked send and watched my future evaporate into the digital ether. 2 days later, I was back in Erie, standing not in a boardroom, but in the bleak, dusty backroom of a failing grocery store, the weight of my family's world squarely on my shoulders once again. The next year was a brutal, relentless grind. I treated the rescue of Ellis Groceries like a military campaign. I slept in my old childhood bedroom, and my days were a blur of spreadsheets, phone calls, and sheer, stubborn effort. I used every strategy, every trick I had planned to use for Vance Corporation, and poured it all into our little store. I started with the bleeding. I met with every single one of our suppliers. These were men my father had known for decades. But relationships don't pay the bills. I didn't go in with excuses. I went in with a plan. I showed them my new marketing strategy, my sales projections, my cost-cutting measures. I was brutally honest about our situation, and I laid out a clear, step-by-step path back to solvency. I negotiated extended payment terms, smaller, more frequent orders to manage cash flow, and in some cases, consignment deals. Mr. Henderson, our main produce supplier and a notoriously tough old bird, listened to my entire pitch, looked me up and down and grunted. "Your old man should have handed you the reins 10 years ago. You've got a deal, son. But my contract is with you, not him." Next, I went after the customers. The store had gotten stale, forgotten. I orchestrated a complete rebranding. I designed a new, modern logo. I launched a Shop Local, Eat Fresh campaign on social media, featuring the stories of the local farmers we worked with, like Mr. Henderson. I started a weekly email newsletter with recipes and special discounts. I organized a weekend tasting event that brought in hundreds of new faces. It was working. Slowly, then all at once, the tide began to turn. The store started to feel alive again. The aisles were busy. The cash register, which had been collecting dust, began to sing. Within 18 months, we had paid off all our supplier debts. By the end of the second year, we were more profitable than we had been in Brian's entire lifetime. I had done it. I had pulled them back from the brink. I felt a deep, bone-weary satisfaction. I had sacrificed my dream, but I had saved my family. Surely now they would see me. The night of my supposed triumph was a family dinner. My mother cooked my favorite meal. My father opened a bottle of expensive wine. Even Brian was there, having driven in from Pittsburgh. This is it, I thought. This is the moment they say thank you. My father stood, his glass raised. My heart hammered in my chest. As you all know, he began, his voice thick with emotion. The last couple of years have been a roller coaster, but we've come through it stronger than ever. The store is thriving, and it's time to secure its future. He smiled, a wide, proud grin. That's why Eleanor and I have decided to officially hand over the management of Ellis Groceries to Brian. The wine glass in my hand felt suddenly heavy. The air rushed from my lungs. I must have misheard. I looked around the table. My mother was beaming. My Aunt Carol was clapping her hands together softly. And Brian was looking magnanimous, like a king accepting his rightful crown. What? The word was a croak. It's the logical choice, Samuel, my mother said gently, as if explaining something to a slow child. Brian has the education, the legal background. He sees the big picture. Running a business is about more than just stocking shelves. The insult was so profound, so dismissive, it left me speechless. Brian leaned forward, a condescending smile playing on his lips. He patted my hand. You did a good job, Sammy. Really, you held down the fort. But it's time for a real professional to take over. Don't you worry, he added, as if granting a great favor. You can keep handling the day-to-day operations. You're great at that. I looked at my father, pleading with my eyes. He just shrugged, a slight, uncomfortable twitch of his shoulders. It's for the best, son. Brian will elevate the family name. They hadn't just given him the credit. They had, in their minds, completely invalidated my contribution. I wasn't the architect of the success. I was just the hired help who had kept the lights on until the real boss arrived. That night, the familiar ache of being overlooked curdled into something colder, something harder. For the first time, I didn't just feel invisible. I felt erased. And the most pathetic part? I stayed. I went back to work the next day, a ghost in the machine I had built, hoping that one day, my work would finally speak for itself. It never did. Another 2 years slipped by in a haze of quiet resentment. I ran the store, managing inventory, staff, and suppliers with a quiet efficiency that made Brian look like a genius. He would breeze in on a Friday afternoon, clap a few employees on the back, sign some checks, and then take credit for the week's record sales in his report to my parents. I was his ghostwriter, his secret weapon, and he treated me with the casual disregard one might show a particularly useful piece of office equipment. Then came the announcement that sent a ripple of excitement through the family. Brian was engaged. His fiancée, Lauren Vance, was a genuinely sweet girl from a prominent family. Her only flaw, as far as I could see, was her complete inability to see Brian for the egotistical parasite he was. She was quiet, elegant, and seemed to worship the ground he walked on. And her father, I would later learn, was Arthur Vance. The same Arthur Vance whose job offer I had turned down all those years ago. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Of course, the wedding had to be the social event of the season in Erie. It was a chance for my parents to show off their successful son and his beautiful, well-connected bride. And, in a move of stunning, almost comical predictability, they turned to me to make it happen. Samuel, darling, my mother said, cornering me in the dairy aisle one Tuesday, you simply must plan the wedding. You're the only one with the head for details and budgets. Brian is far too busy with the firm, and Lauren's family is handling the rehearsal dinner. It would be such a tremendous help. It was the same old song. Too important for the work, but happy to take the glory. A sane person would have laughed in her face. A sane person would have told her to hire a professional. But a small, stupid, stubbornly hopeful part of me saw this as a final chance. Maybe this time it would be different. This wasn't about the store. This was a personal, family event. If I could execute this flawlessly, if I could give Brian and his bride the perfect day, then they would have no choice but to acknowledge me, to thank me, to finally see me. So I said yes. I'd be honored, Mom. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I approached the task like a business project. I created spreadsheets. I made timelines. I researched vendors with the tenacity of a detective. I sat down with Brian and Lauren to understand their vision, which mostly consisted of Brian pointing at pictures in glossy magazines and saying, "I want that." The budget was the first hurdle. My parents magnanimously offered $15,000. It was a generous amount, but not nearly enough for the kind of statement wedding Brian had in his head. The initial quotes were coming in closer to $30,000. When I presented this reality to them, my father balked and Brian scoffed. "Well, figure it out, Sam," Brian said, as if I could magically pull money from thin air. And so, in a moment of utter self-destructive insanity, I made the fatal error. "I'll cover the difference," I heard myself say. "I have some savings. I'll put in $10,000. Consider it my wedding gift." The relief on their faces was immediate and absolute. Brian clapped me on the back. "See? I knew you'd handle it, little brother. You always do." That $10,000 was everything I had. It was my escape Erie fund, the nest egg I had been slowly rebuilding since the Vance Corporation fiasco, and I was lighting it on fire to throw a party for the brother who had stolen my career. With the budget settled, I went to work, and I was damn good at it. I found a breathtaking historic manor that had a last-minute cancellation. I negotiated a brilliant package deal with a caterer that included the cake and an open bar. I found a photographer with an artist's eye and a band that could get even my father on the dance floor. Every contract was scrutinized, every deposit paid promptly from my dwindling bank account. I had it all locked down. A champagne wedding on a beer budget. I presented the final, detailed plan to the family. It was perfect, elegant, impressive, and not a single dollar over our agreed-upon total. For a brief, shining moment, everyone was happy. Lauren was thrilled. My parents were proud. Even Brian seemed genuinely impressed. "Wow, Sam," he said. "This is actually perfect." That single word of praise was like a drug. It fed the desperate, starving part of my soul. I let myself believe that this time, things would be different. This time, my sacrifice would be worth it. The fragile piece of the perfect plan lasted for exactly 4 days. The first tremor that signaled the coming earthquake was, predictably, my Aunt Carol. She was my father's sister, a woman whose entire personality was built on a foundation of snobbery and one-upmanship. She came for Sunday dinner, listened to my detailed wedding plans with a pursed-lipped smile, and then proceeded to dismantle them, piece by piece. "A local band?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension as she sipped her wine. "Oh, Eleanor, no. That's a bit quaint. For a wedding of this caliber, for a man of Brian's professional standing, you need something more sophisticated." I was just at a fundraiser in Pittsburgh, and they had a string quartet. It was absolutely divine. So much more class. I saw the flicker in Brian's eyes. A seed had been planted. "A string quartet does sound pretty amazing," he mused, looking at me. "Brian, the band is already booked and the deposit is paid," I said, keeping my voice even. "A string quartet of the kind she's talking about would cost at least $5,000. It's not in the budget." "Oh, Samuel, don't be such a stick in the mud," my mother chided instantly. "This is his wedding day. A little extra for some elegance is worth it. Just make it work." "Make it work" became the soundtrack to my personal hell for the next 2 months. It was the answer to every ludicrous, budget-busting demand that followed. After the string quartet came the flowers. The beautiful, locally sourced arrangements I had planned were suddenly deemed common. Brian, after a conversation with Aunt Carol about a society wedding she'd read about, decided he absolutely had to have white orchids. Flown in from Hawaii. "It's about the aesthetic, Sam," he explained, as if I were a simpleton. "It's a look. It's prestige. It's also $3,000 for flowers that will be dead in a day," I countered, my voice tight. "And the carbon footprint is insane. Don't ruin your brother's vision with your politics," my father grumbled from behind his newspaper. "Just make it work." The demands snowballed into an avalanche of entitlement. Lauren, bless her heart, would occasionally protest, saying, "Oh, Brian, that sounds like a lot." but she would immediately fold the second he applied any pressure. He wanted a custom ice sculpture of their initials. He wanted a vintage Rolls-Royce for their arrival. He wanted a celebrity DJ from Cleveland to take over after the quaint local band finished their set. Each new demand was a battle. I would present the cost, the logistical nightmare, the simple fact that the money was not there. And each time, I would be met with the same wall of indignation. "Why are you making this so difficult?" my mother would ask, her face a mask of disappointment. "It's like you want my wedding to be second-rate," Brian would accuse, his voice filled with venom. "Are you that jealous of my happiness?" The accusation of jealousy was the knife they twisted most often. It was their go-to explanation for my fiscal responsibility. They couldn't conceive of the idea that I was simply trying to adhere to the budget we had all agreed on. In their minds, my practicality was a personal attack, a manifestation of my deep-seated resentment of his success. The irony was, they were the ones creating the resentment with every single entitled demand. I was exhausted. I was working 60-hour weeks at the store to make Brian look good, and spending every spare moment fighting with him about his wedding. The $10,000 from my savings was long gone, spent on deposits for things we didn't need. Now they were expecting me to fund this ever-expanding fantasy out of my own pocket, a pocket they knew was not deep. The dream of a thank you had long since died. Now, my only goal was survival. Just get to the wedding day, let it happen, and then, finally, be free. The night before the wedding was meant to be a final, calming family dinner at my parents' house. The calm lasted until the dessert plates were cleared. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and a gallon of caffeine. I had spent the entire day on the phone, soothing the ruffled feathers of a florist who was furious about the last-minute orchid demand and a venue manager who was asking pointed questions about the growing list of unauthorized vendors. All I wanted was to eat, go home, and fall into a coma until my alarm went off the next morning. Brian, however, was practically vibrating with a manic, last-minute energy. He tapped his fork against his water glass to get everyone's attention, a smug, self-satisfied smile on his face. "Okay, team," he began, as if we were in a corporate huddle. "I've had a stroke of genius. A final touch to elevate the entire experience tomorrow." I felt a familiar, cold dread snake up my spine. "First," he announced, "I think we need a lobster tail station for the late-night snack. Chicken is just so basic. Second, I was tasting the champagne we ordered, and it's fine, but it's not great. Dad, we should get a few cases of that vintage stuff you love. And finally, and this is the big one, a friend of a friend knows a guy who does wedding photography for pro athletes. He's available tomorrow. We have to have him. Imagine the pictures." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the sheer, breathtaking audacity. It wasn't just one demand. It was a triple-decker sandwich of financial insanity. I placed my fork down very carefully. "Brian," I said, my voice dangerously low. "No." He blinked, genuinely surprised by my flat refusal. "What do you mean, no?" "I'm not asking, I'm telling. It's my wedding. The caterer's final numbers were due last week," I explained, ticking the points off on my fingers. "The alcohol has been purchased and delivered, and we have an excellent, very expensive photographer already under contract. There is no more money. The budget, the one I paid for, is gone. It is over. We cannot add a single thing." Brian's face, which had been beaming with excitement, contorted into an ugly, familiar sneer. "The one you paid for? Oh, please, don't act like you're some great martyr. It's $10,000. That's a rounding error on my future salary. You're being pathetic and cheap just like always. You're trying to ruin this for me. You've been trying to sabotage this wedding from the beginning because you can't stand to see me happy." The accusation, so ludicrous and so cruel, hung in the air. I looked around the table for support, for just one person to say, "That's enough, Brian." My father suddenly found the pattern on his dinner plate intensely fascinating. Aunt Carol nodded in agreement with Brian. And my mother looked at me. Her face was not angry. It was not sad. It was cold. Utterly, glacially cold. She set her wine glass down with a soft click. "Samuel," she said, and her voice was as chilling as her expression. Your brother has a point. You have been needlessly difficult through this whole process. Honestly, at this point, the greatest gift you could give your brother for his wedding is you vanishing from this family. Forever. The world stopped. The cheerful ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to grow louder, marking the seconds of my own execution. Vanishing. Forever. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an insult hurled in the heat of the moment. It was a calculated statement of my worth. 0. It was a severance package for 28 years of service. Something inside me, the part that had spent a lifetime absorbing blows, swallowing insults, and hoping for praise, didn't just break. It turned to dust and blew away. And in its place was a vast, silent, and terrifying emptiness. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. I slowly, deliberately, pushed my chair back from the table. I stood up. I looked at each of their faces. Brian's triumphant smirk, my father's cowardice, my mother's icy dismissal. I didn't say a single word. I turned my back on them, walked out of the dining room, down the hall, and out the front door into the cool night air. The click of the door closing behind me was the last sound I ever wanted to hear from that house. It was the sound of a final, irrevocable full stop. The inside of my car was a sanctuary of silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. The familiar streets of my hometown unspooled before me like a movie I had seen too many times. Every corner held a memory, and tonight, every memory was tainted. There was the park where I scraped my knee and my dad carried me home. There was the movie theater where I'd taken my first date. There was the grocery store, Ellis Groceries, a monument to my greatest sacrifice and my biggest mistake. Vanishing. Forever. The words weren't echoing anymore. They had settled, heavy and cold, in the pit of my stomach. My mother's voice, her calm, measured delivery. It was a clinical assessment, a problem identified, and a solution proposed. I was the problem. Vanishing was the solution. For the first hour I was numb, a hollowed-out shell just going through the motions of driving. My hands were steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road. But my mind was a blank, white static. Then, the numbness began to recede, and the pain flooded in. It was a deep, tearing agony, the pain of a limb being amputated without anesthesia. I thought of every sacrifice, big and small, the patched bicycle tire, the nights spent studying the store's finances, the 36-hour marathon during the blizzard, the Vance Corporation contract, the dream I had killed with my own hands. I had done it all for them, for their approval, for their love, and it had all amounted to less than nothing. I had to pull over. The tears came so violently I couldn't see the road. I parked on the gravel shoulder of a dark, deserted country road, the engine ticking in the sudden silence, and I let myself shatter. I pounded my fists on the steering wheel, a raw, guttural sound of pure anguish tearing from my throat. It was the sound of a lifetime of being invisible, of being second best, of being the useful, disposable son. I wept for the boy who just wanted his parents to be proud of him, and for the man who had finally realized they never would be. The storm passed. The tears subsided, leaving behind a landscape of ruin and a strange, cold clarity. The pain was still there, but it had been burned clean by the rage. They didn't see me as a son. They saw me as a tool that had just been told it was no longer needed. And that's when the new thought began to form. It started as a whisper, a flicker of rebellion in the darkness. They wanted me to vanish. Okay, I would vanish, but I wouldn't go quietly. I wouldn't just fade into the background like I always had. If a tool is removed from a machine, the machine stops working. I was the tool that had built their perfect wedding. What would happen if I just took myself away? A slow, humorless smile touched my lips, felt alien on my face. They wanted a gift, the gift of my absence. Fine. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would give them an absence so profound, so complete, it would swallow their perfect day whole. My hand, now perfectly steady, reached for the phone. I ignored the litany of texts and missed calls that had already begun. I scrolled to the bottom of my contacts list and hit the name, Noah. He picked up on the first ring, his voice laced with concern. Sam? It's after midnight. Everything okay for tomorrow? I took a deep breath, the cold night air filling my lungs, feeling like the first clean breath I'd taken in years. You know how you've been telling me for 10 years that I'm a doormat? I said, my voice eerily calm. Yeah. Well, I said, the grim smile audible in my voice. The doormat is about to get up and walk away, and it's going to take the whole damn front porch with it. I found a cheap, anonymous motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs and questionable bedspreads. It was perfect. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, drinking bitter, black coffee from a styrofoam cup, and I planned. There was no rage in my actions now, just a cold, methodical precision. I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder labeled Brian's wedding, and arranged all the contracts and invoices in the order I would need them. I was dismantling a bomb I had built myself, and I knew exactly which wires to cut, and in what sequence. At 7:59 a.m., I took a final sip of coffee. Showtime. My first call was to Deborah, the events manager at the Erie Grand Manor. She was a cheerful, efficient woman I developed a good rapport with over the past few months. She answered with a chipper, Erie Grand Manor. Deborah speaking. Deborah, good morning. It's Samuel Ellis. Sam, the man of the hour. Well, the brother of the man of the hour, she laughed. Are you all ready for the big day? Actually, Deborah, there's been a significant change of plan, I said, my voice calm and level. I'm calling to inform you that the Ellis-Vance wedding scheduled for today has been canceled. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete I thought the call might have dropped. I'm sorry, she finally said, her voice a squeak. Canceled? Sam, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. The wedding is in 6 hours. Our staff is already on their way in. I understand the inconvenience, I said, my tone unapologetic. It is an unforeseen family emergency. As per our contract, Section 7B, cancellations within 24 hours result in the forfeiture of the full deposit. I am aware of this and I am authorizing it. Please consider this my formal and final notification. But the bride? The groom? Shouldn't I speak with your parents? She stammered, clearly in shock. No, I said, my voice firm, cutting off any room for argument. You will not. The contract is in my name. The deposit was paid from my bank account. The decision is mine. The event is canceled. Thank you for your services up to this point. I hung up before she could formulate another question. My heart was pounding, but not with fear. It was a thrill, a surge of pure, unadulterated control. The next call was to the caterer, a gruff but fair man named Sal. I gave him the same speech. He whistled. Wow, kid, that's cold. But hey, you paid the deposit, it's your call. More roast chicken for my staff, I guess. The florist was more dramatic. But the orchids, the Hawaiian orchids have just arrived. I'm very sorry to hear that, I said, and to my surprise, I actually was. It wasn't her fault. The deposit is yours to keep, of course. One by one, I went down the list. The band, the photographer, the limo service for the Rolls-Royce, the calligrapher, the bakery for the 5-tier cake. Each conversation was a nail in the coffin of my brother's perfect day. With each call, I felt lighter. I was severing ties not just to a wedding, but to a lifetime of servitude. I was reclaiming my time, my money, and my sanity. By 9:45 a.m., it was done. An entire wedding, meticulously constructed over 6 months, had been vaporized in under 2 hours. I logged into my online banking. The non-refundable deposits were a painful loss, nearly $3,000. But the larger payments, the final balances I had been scheduled to pay on the day, were now safe. $7,000 of my hard-earned money was no longer destined to be turned into ice sculptures and dead flowers. It was mine. I took the burner phone I had bought the night before from a 24-hour gas station, turned it on, and sent one single text to my own number, which I had left on and charging in my car. They wanted me to vanish. Wish granted. Then I snapped the cheap phone in half and tossed it in the motel trash can. I packed my bag, checked out, and got back in my car. This time I knew where I was going. South. Anywhere but here. The first sign that the carefully constructed universe of the Ellis family was about to implode came at precisely 11:02 a.m. My mother, Eleanor, swept into the grand ballroom of the Erie Grand Manor, ready to assume her role as the gracious mother of the groom. She was expecting to see a flurry of activity. Florists arranging centerpieces, caterers setting up serving stations, the band doing a sound check. She was met with silence, an emptiness. The vast room was a hollow cavern. The tables were stacked against one wall, the chairs against the other. The floor was bare. There wasn't a flower, a tablecloth, or a single human being in sight. Her first reaction was confusion, then irritation. She marched through the hall to the manager's office, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on the polished floor. She found Deborah, the events manager, sitting at her desk, looking as though she'd seen a ghost. "Deborah, what on earth is going on?" my mother demanded, forgoing any pleasantries. "Where is everyone? The wedding is in a few hours. This is completely unacceptable." Deborah looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of pity and fear. "Mrs. Ellis," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to tell you this. I received a call this morning. From your son. From Samuel." "Samuel?" my mother repeated, confused. "What does he have to do with this?" "He canceled, Mrs. Ellis," Deborah said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He canceled the entire event. He was very specific. He cited the contract. He said it was a family emergency." My mother stared at her, her mind refusing to process the information. "Canceled? That's impossible. It's a joke. It must be some kind of horrible, childish prank. He wouldn't dare." She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. "I'll call him right now and sort this out." But the call went straight to voicemail. So did the next one. And the one after that. By the time my father and Brian arrived at noon, my mother was in a full-blown panic. Brian walked in, beaming, ready to inspect his kingdom, and was met with the sight of his mother pacing frantically in an empty room. "What's going on?" he asked, his smile faltering. "Why isn't anything set up?" "It's Sam," my father said, his face grim. He'd been on his own phone trying to reach the caterer. "He did this. He called every single vendor and canceled. Sal said he was calm as a cucumber, told him to keep the deposit and that the wedding was off." "He what?" The roar that erupted from Brian's chest was primal. It was the sound of a golden god discovering he was mortal after all. "That little bastard. That insignificant little worm. How dare he? I'll ruin him. I'll have his job. I'll get him disbarred." "He doesn't have a job to lose, and he's not a lawyer," my father reminded him numbly. The first guests began to arrive shortly after 2 o'clock, walking into a scene of utter chaos. Instead of champagne and classical music, they were met with the sight of the groom, red-faced and screaming into his phone, the mother of the groom weeping in a corner, and the father of the groom looking utterly helpless. And then they saw the bride. Lauren was standing by a window, a statue of frozen horror, her perfect makeup ruined by silent tears. Her dream day had turned into a public spectacle of humiliation. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the arriving crowd like a virus. "What happened? Did he get left at the altar? I heard they couldn't afford it. Someone said the brother had a breakdown." Brian, in his rage, made everything worse. He tried to bully the venue staff into action. "I don't care what my brother said. I'm the groom. Get some tables out here. Order pizzas. Do something." Deborah, her patience finally exhausted, confronted him. "Sir, your family's contract was with your brother. He canceled it. As of 8:05 this morning, you have no event booked here. Frankly, you and your guests are trespassing. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The words hung in the air, a final, brutal humiliation. The wedding wasn't just ruined. It had been legally and officially erased from existence. My family, who had worshipped at the altar of appearances their entire lives, were now the stars of the most mortifying social disaster Erie had seen in decades. And the person they had told to vanish had done just that, leaving behind a black hole that had consumed their entire world. Into this vortex of chaos and humiliation, a long, black limousine glided to a silent stop at the manor's entrance. The chauffeur, looking crisp and professional, opened the rear door. A man in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit stepped out. He was in his late 50s, with a commanding presence and an air of authority that made people instinctively stand up straighter. It was Arthur Vance, the CEO of Vance Corporation, and, more importantly, the father of the bride. He strode into the lobby, his sharp eyes taking in the entire disaster in a single sweeping glance. He saw the bewildered guests whispering in clumps. He saw my weeping mother and my shell-shocked father. He saw Brian, who was still sputtering with rage. And he saw his daughter, Lauren, standing alone, a tragic figure in white. His face remained impassive, but his voice, when he spoke, cut through the noise like a shard of ice. "Lauren, can someone please explain to me what in the hell is going on?" Lauren ran to him, her composure finally shattering into 1,000 pieces as she collapsed into his arms. "Daddy, it's a nightmare," she sobbed. "Everything's gone. Sam, Brian's brother, he canceled everything this morning. They had a fight last night." Brian, seeing a powerful potential ally, immediately rushed over, shifting into his most earnest and victimized persona. "Mr. Vance, thank God you're here. This is all my brother's doing. He's deeply unstable, sir, consumed by jealousy. He's done this purely to sabotage my happiness and embarrass our family." My father, seeing his cue, chimed in. "It's true, Arthur. The boy has always been difficult. We are mortified that you and your family have been dragged into this. We will handle him, I assure you." Arthur Vance listened, his gaze unblinking. He held his daughter, gently stroking her hair, but his eyes were fixed on my family. He let the silence stretch, his lack of response more unnerving than any outburst would have been. Finally, he looked down at Lauren. "A fight?" he asked softly. "What was the fight about?" Lauren, finding strength in her father's presence, took a shaky breath. "It was about money," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Brian wanted to add more things to the wedding, expensive things. Sam said he couldn't. He said he had already spent $10,000 of his own money. Then his mother." Lauren looked at my mother with a flash of anger. She told him that the best gift he could give Brian was to vanish from the family forever. The ugly words, repeated in the quiet hall, seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The remaining guests stared, mouths agape. Arthur Vance's expression hardened. A flicker of something, disgust, perhaps, crossed his face. He looked at Brian, then at my parents. He seemed to be studying them, dissecting them with his gaze. Then, a look of dawning recognition. "Samuel," he said slowly, testing the name. "Samuel Ellis. I know that name." He turned his full attention to my father. "Richard, let me ask you something. Do you have any idea who your other son really is?" My father looked utterly bewildered. "What are you talking about, Arthur? He's a good boy. He helps out at our grocery store." Arthur let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. It was a sound of pure contempt. "No, your son, Samuel, is the marketing prodigy who nearly landed a major contract with my company years ago. I interviewed him myself. He had more talent and insight in his little finger than most of my senior staff have in their whole bodies. He withdrew at the last minute because of a family emergency. I see now what that emergency was. He was coming home to save your asses." He took a step forward, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone that was more intimidating than any shout. "You had a racehorse in your stable, and you were treating it like a plow mule. You were so blinded by the cheap shine of this one," he gestured dismissively at Brian, "that you couldn't see the pure gold standing right next to you." He let the words hang in the air, a public indictment of their life's greatest failure. Then he delivered the coup de grace. I am going to find your son. And when I do, I'm not just going to offer him a job. I'm going to offer him a promotion to a senior role in my company, with a salary that will make his brothers look like a joke. I'm going to give him the career and the respect that you were too ignorant and too cruel to give him yourselves." He looked at Brian, his eyes filled with a chilling finality. "Congratulations, son. You got your wish. Your brother has vanished. And in doing so, he has exposed you all for the pathetic, short-sighted fools you truly are." CTA. This was the moment that changed everything. The moment I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me this far. You guys are amazing. If you could, please hit that like button and comment the number 1 down below, just so I know you've been on this journey with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of my journey. The fallout from Arthur Vance's verbal detonation was swift and absolute. He didn't wait for a response. He simply put a protective arm around his daughter and guided her through the stunned crowd and out of the manor. As they passed one of the bare tables, Lauren paused. With a quiet, deliberate movement, she twisted the large diamond engagement ring from her finger and placed it on the polished wood. It glittered under the chandeliers, a lonely, expensive monument to a future that would never happen. A quiet, final divorce from the whole Ellis clan. The departure of the Vances was like pulling the plug on a life support machine. The last vestiges of hope for salvaging the day, or their reputation, died. The remaining guests, now armed with the full, juicy story, began to flee as if escaping a burning building. They left in a torrent of whispers, eager to spread the tale of the Ellis family's spectacular implosion. Left alone in the echoing hall, my family finally crumbled. My mother collapsed into a chair, her sobs now loud and ugly. My father just stood there, looking old and shrunken, his face the color of ash. Brian, however, was a volcano of rage. His humiliation was so complete, so public, that it could only be expressed through violence. He let out a wordless scream and kicked a decorative urn, sending it crashing to the floor where it shattered into 100 pieces. "This is all his fault," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "He'll pay for this. I'll find him. He thinks he can run to Vance? I'll tell them what he is. I'll destroy him." Later that night, fueled by whiskey and self-pity, Brian made his final, fatal mistake. He logged onto the Erie Community Web Forum, a place usually reserved for discussing lost pets and local bake sales, and he unleashed a torrent of vitriol. He wrote a long, self-serving post, painting me as a deranged, mentally ill monster who had meticulously planned the destruction of his wedding out of a lifetime of bitter jealousy. He played the victim card with the skill of a seasoned actor, hoping to win the sympathy of the town. For about an hour, it seemed to work. A few of their close friends and relatives posted supportive comments. "That's monstrous. We're so sorry, Brian. Your brother needs professional help." But then the eyewitnesses began to log on. One of Lauren's bridesmaids was the first. She wrote a calm, detailed account of the fight she had overheard the night before, including my mother's vanishing comment. Then another guest commented, "I was there. I heard what Mr. Vance said. Brian's brother saved their business, and they treated him like dirt." Soon, a floodgate opened. Story after story poured in, from former employees of the grocery store, from neighbors, from old high school classmates. They told stories of my long hours, of Brian's arrogance, of my parents' blatant favoritism. Brian's attempt to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly. He hadn't just started a fire, he'd thrown gasoline on it. By morning, the post had become the hottest topic in town. The Ellis family name wasn't just mud. It was radioactive. Hundreds of miles south, in a nondescript motel room in North Carolina, I was blissfully unaware of the digital firestorm I had created. I had spent the day driving, the steady hum of the highway a balm to my frayed soul. With every mile marker that passed, I felt the weight of my old life receding. I was exhausted, but it was a clean exhaustion, the feeling of having completed a long and arduous journey. That evening, I took a deep breath and turned my phone on. It immediately exploded with a backlog of notifications. I bypassed the dozens of angry voicemails and texts from my family and went straight to a message from Noah. Holy crap, dude. You need to see the Erie forum. You're a folk hero. Also, call me ASAP. With a sense of detached curiosity, I pulled up the website. My jaw dropped. I spent the next hour scrolling through the thread, watching my family's public execution in real time. I saw Brian's desperate, lying post, and the avalanche of comments that buried him. It was surreal. My private pain had become public knowledge, and for the first time, people were taking my side. Then I saw I had a voicemail from an unknown number with a Charlotte area code. My heart skipped a beat. I pressed play. Mr. Ellis? Samuel? This is Arthur Vance. I hope this number is correct. Your friend Noah was kind enough to provide it. I meant what I said today. I have a business proposal I would very much like to discuss with you. Please, give me a call when you get a moment. His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Calm, direct, and radiating authority. It was the voice of a different world, a different future. As I was staring at the phone, another call came in. The caller ID read Dad. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to block the number and be done with it forever. But another part needed to hear it. I needed to know what they would say, now that their world was in ashes. I answered. The voice on the other end was not the booming, confident patriarch I knew. It was the thin, reedy voice of a defeated man. Samuel? Thank God. Where are you? Does it matter? I asked, my voice flat. Listen, son. He began, a pleading tone in his voice. You've made your point. You were angry. We understand. But this has gone too far. You've humiliated us. You need to come home now. We have to do damage control. You can release a statement, say you had a breakdown. We can fix this. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it left me breathless. Even now, after everything, his first instinct was to use me to fix the problem I had created in response to their abuse. Fix this, I said, a cold, humorless laugh escaping my lips. There is no this to fix. There is no we. You made that perfectly clear last night. I'm just giving you what you wanted. Don't be so dramatic, Samuel. This isn't just about us. It's about the family name, the inheritance. He trailed off, realizing how pathetic it sounded. The family name is your problem now, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. The inheritance is gone. Isn't it? And so am I. You told me to vanish. I'm taking your advice. This is the last time you will ever speak to me. Samuel, wait. Don't you dare hang up on me. I pressed the red icon on the screen, ending the call. Then, with a strange sense of ceremony, I blocked his number. Then my mother's. Then Brian's. Then Aunt Carol's. It was a digital massacre, a final, cleansing purge. The lines of communication were cut. The severance was complete. The phone call with Arthur Vance changed the trajectory of my life. He didn't just offer me a job, he offered me a lifeline. 2 days after our call, I was on a plane to Charlotte, North Carolina, for an in-person meeting. I walked into the Vance Corporation headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel, feeling like an imposter. But Arthur treated me not as a charity case, but as a valued colleague. He had remembered my marketing proposal from all those years ago. You had an instinct for the heart of a business, Sam, he told me, sitting across from me in his corner office that overlooked the city. It's a rare gift. I want that gift here. He made me an offer that made my head spin. Senior marketing strategist for the entire Southeast region. The salary was more than my father had made in his best year at the grocery store. Came with benefits, a relocation package, and most importantly, a chance to start over completely and totally. I accepted on the spot. Asheville, where the regional office was located, became my new home. It was a city alive with a creative, vibrant energy that felt a million miles away from the stagnant, judgmental fishbowl of Erie. The mountains that surrounded the city became my sanctuary. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Work was my salvation. I poured all the energy I had once spent on my family's drama into my new career. I was surrounded by smart, ambitious people who challenged me and respected my ideas. I wasn't Brian's little brother or the fixer. I was Sam, the guy who had a knack for turning struggling campaigns into massive successes. Arthur became a mentor, taking me under his wing, teaching me the nuances of corporate strategy and, more importantly, how to value my own contributions. The promotion he had promised in that chaotic wedding hall became a reality after my first year, when he made me director. I started building a life outside of work. I found a small apartment with a balcony where I could watch the fog roll over the Blue Ridge Mountains in the morning. I found a local coffee shop where the owner, a sharp, funny woman named Sarah, became my first real friend. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. She knew I had a painful past, but she never pushed. She just created a safe space for me to be myself. Noah, my oldest friend, was my connection to my former life. He'd give me periodic updates. The news from Erie was a relentless drumbeat of decline. Ellis Groceries had gone into bankruptcy within 6 months of my departure. The public humiliation from the wedding disaster had been the final nail in its coffin. No one wanted to shop at the store run by those people. My parents lost everything. They had to sell their big house, the one they had been so proud of, to settle their debts. They moved into a cramped, depressing apartment complex across town. Brian's life had imploded even more spectacularly. After Lauren broke the engagement, his firm, embarrassed by the scandal, had quietly let him go. No other reputable firm in the area would touch him. The last Noah had heard, Brian was working at a local hardware store, a bitter, angry shell of the golden boy he had once been. Hearing this news didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it might. There was no joy in their misery. There was just a profound, hollow sadness for the waste of it all. They had destroyed their lives, and nearly destroyed mine, in their worship of a false idol. But my sadness was distant now, like watching a sad movie about people I used to know. My life was here in Asheville in the clean mountain air. I was building something new, something that was entirely my own, from the ashes of the life they had burned down. Just as I began to feel truly settled, truly free, a piece of the past found its way to my new address. It was a letter, forwarded by Noah, with my mother's familiar, elegant handwriting on the envelope. My hands trembled as I held it. Part of me wanted to throw it directly into the trash, unopened. But the ghosts of guilt and obligation are hard to exorcise completely. I slid it open. The letter was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It began with a flowery, tear-stained apology for the unfortunate words spoken that night, quickly pivoted to her current state. She wrote that she was terribly ill, a mysterious ailment, she called it, that the doctors couldn't seem to diagnose. She was weak. She was fading. She spent most of her days in bed. My father was lost, struggling to cope. Brian was a broken man, consumed by depression. Then came the hook. Her one final wish, the only thing that could bring her peace in her final days, was to see me, to look into my eyes and tell me how sorry she was, to heal the rift in our shattered family before it was too late. It was so perfectly crafted to prey on my oldest insecurities, my lifelong role as the caretaker. It sent a spear of guilt straight into my heart. What if it was true? What if she was really dying? Could I live with myself if I let her die alone, believing her son hated her? The old programming kicked in. The urge to fix, to soothe, to take away their pain was a powerful current, threatening to pull me back under. I was so conflicted that I took the letter to Sarah's coffee shop. I needed an outside perspective. She read it silently, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she folded it carefully and handed it back to me. "Sam," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm not going to tell you what to do, but as an objective observer, this letter has more red flags than a communist parade." Mysterious ailment? Fading away? Healthy people don't talk like that. Desperate manipulators do. She's not asking for forgiveness. She's issuing a summons. Her words helped to clear some of the emotional fog. Later that day, I mentioned it to Arthur during one of our weekly check-ins. He listened intently, then leaned back in his chair. "Let me tell you a story, Sam," he said. "Early in my career, I had a business partner who screwed me over. A year later, he came back, full of apologies, claiming his company was on the verge of collapse and he needed my help to save it for his family. I almost fell for it. Then I did my due diligence. It turned out his company was fine. He just wanted my expertise to land a big contract he couldn't get on his own. He looked me straight in the eye. People show you who they are, Sam. It's our job to believe them the first time. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that obliterated any lingering doubt, arrived in my inbox that night. It was an email from Lauren Vance. We had exchanged a few polite messages over the past year, but this one was different. "Hi Sam," she wrote. "I hope you're doing well. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that your mother might be reaching out to you. I feel like you deserve to know the truth. I had lunch with my aunt last week, who is in the same book club as your mother. According to her, your mother is in perfect health, but is absolutely miserable because she's been ostracized from her social circle. She's desperate to create a story of family reconciliation to try and salvage her reputation. Also, my father's lawyer came across something during the initial financial fallout after the wedding was canceled. He thought you should have it. He said it might be useful if there were ever any lingering legal or financial ties regarding the family business or a potential inheritance dispute." Attached to the email was a PDF. It was a collection of bank statements from the Ellis Groceries business account, dating back 5 years. They clearly showed a pattern of systematic embezzlement. Dozens of large, round-number withdrawals, all signed by Brian. He had been siphoning money from the store for years to fund his expensive lifestyle. The financial crisis that had destroyed my dream career wasn't just a result of mismanagement. It was felony theft, and my parents had known. They had covered for him, then called me home to unknowingly clean up the evidence and bail out their golden boy criminal. I stared at the screen, at the black and white proof of their ultimate betrayal. It was so much worse than I had ever imagined. The letter in my hand wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was an accessory to a crime. I walked over to my shredder, fed the letter into the slot, and listened to the whining blades tear my mother's lies into 1,000 meaningless pieces. The last ghost of my past had finally been laid to rest. It's been 2 years now since that fateful day. My life in Asheville feels like the only real life I've ever had. The man who drove away from Erie in a haze of pain and rage feels like a character in a book I read a long time ago. I am happy. It's a quiet, steady kind of happiness, not the frantic, fleeting joy I used to chase. It's the peace that comes from building a life on a foundation of self-respect instead of the quicksand of others' approval. My work at Vance Corporation continues to be challenging and rewarding. Arthur Vance has become more than a boss. He's a mentor and a true friend. My friendships with Sarah and Noah are the cornerstones of my life. We've formed our own little family, one built on mutual respect, laughter, and showing up for each other, no questions asked. We spend holidays together, go on weekend hiking trips, and navigate the ups and downs of life as a team. I hear whispers about my old family from time to time through the grapevine. The stories are always sad and pathetic. My parents live like hermits, prisoners of the shame they brought upon themselves. Brian, I heard, finally lost his job at the hardware store and moved to another state, hoping to escape his reputation. They are all living in the wreckage of a world they burned down themselves. I feel a distant pity for them, but nothing more. They are no longer my burden to carry. I learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of my life. You cannot force people to value you. You can only choose to value yourself. Walking away from them wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. Vanishing from their lives was the only way I could finally become visible to myself. This morning, I was standing on the summit of a mountain trail, the cool, clean air filling my lungs. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the whole world in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful and it was peaceful. I pulled out my phone to capture the moment, and I saw a notification. A friend request on social media. The name was Eleanor Ellis. My mother. 2 years ago, that notification would have sent my heart into a frantic rhythm. It would have opened the floodgates of guilt, anger, and turmoil. But this morning, standing on top of the world, I just looked at it. I saw it for what it was. A ghost knocking on a door that was no longer there. A final, desperate attempt to pull me back into a story that had already ended. With a calm, steady finger, I pressed decline. Then I blocked the profile. I put my phone back in my pocket, took a deep breath of the mountain air, and watched the sunrise. The sky was vast and open, and for the first time in my life it was all mine. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It took me a long time to realize that my worth wasn't determined by my family's approval, and that real strength often means choosing to let go. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace? I'd be honored to read your story in the comments below. And if you wouldn't mind, please give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss what I share next. Your support truly means the world to me.
Of what the couples were doing. And then they started this educational program, which they're very good at and have been doing for a while. Once a week, they talk to them. So how's it going? Have you changed this? What are you using now? And so on. So it was not just a one-time thing. And if you were doing this, it would be short, just like use these things maybe. But along with that, we sent them the fellow kits to collect their semen. Okay, so we have beginning, middle, and end. It was 3 months, so beginning, 6 weeks, 12 weeks. And you know why 3 months?
Why?
It takes 70 days to make a sperm. So we wanted to have a turnover within the course of the intervention. Yeah. So we sent them a kit, and they collected their semen at home, which is nice for guys because you don't have to go into the lab and do it there. And, it's much better at home, right?
Yeah.
And they sent it in, and they figured out how to get all the parameters right, even though it's mailed. And, so the couples did that. So we had, over time, levels in their body of the chemicals, semen quality, what they were doing, what they changed in their life, because we had this record of everything they changed. And then finally, we saw who got pregnant. And I hope your listeners will watch The Plastic Detox. It's a movie that a lot of people love and found, really moving. And you should watch it.
Can I ask you about the coffee question? When you go to a place like, let's just say Starbucks, not to single them out, but